Okay, I think we'll get going. So welcome everyone. I'm really glad you're here. This is, I think, we've been running the webinars on Blackboard and Zoom and Panopto, all really important. I think this engaging students and thinking about how we can work with them in a different way than we're used to is really just as important as any of the tools that we use. So hopefully this session will be helpful for you today to get your wheels turning. We'll share some ideas with you. But hopefully, if nothing else, it'll give you some questions to consider and some things to think about and things that we could talk about together. So again, welcome. So my name is Mark Hofer. I'm with the Studio for Teaching and Learning Innovation, and I'm also a faculty member, also teaching a course and working on moving my course from a solely face-to-face format into this more remote online format, just like all of you. So I'm sure I'm encountering some of the same challenges and difficulties as you are. So I have a lot of empathy for what you do. I am grateful to be joined by Candace Benji-Small from the library. She's going to be managing the chat as we talk today. I can certainly not do two things at once. So thankfully, Candace has volunteered to help with that. So if you don't see the chat window on your screen yet, if you go down to the bottom, there should be a link for a little button for chat, and that should open that up. And feel free to post questions in the chat window as we go. Also, again, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question as we go too, if you'd like. We'll definitely have a significant chunk of time at the end of the session today for back and forth Q&A. So if it's okay, I'll get started, just dive right in. So first of all, it's, I think, important to think about student engagement is about connections. Okay, so it's really important to think about student engagement as connection, and it's helpful, I think, to have a definition. So this is sort of a broad operational definition of what we mean by student engagement in our courses. So it's variables like their attention, their curiosity, their interest, and maybe most importantly in the context we find ourselves in right now, optimism and passion. Just like for all of us as faculty and instructors, this is a new experience for many students, and it's going to be jarring. So the confidence that they feel in themselves to learn in this format and to progress in their learning is really instrumental in the emotional connection they have with the coursework, as well as their motivation to persevere, especially when they encounter challenges. So it really is an important thing to consider as we move forward. Just a few kind of big ideas before we jump into some of the more operational nuts and bolts. When we think about trying to humanize remote teaching, a few things to remember. It really can feel very isolating. Students may be packed at home with their siblings and parents working remotely, but they're going to feel isolated from the tribe. They're going to feel isolated from their university community. And that's something that's really important for us to remember. We're really fortunate to live and work in an environment where we have these deep, meaningful connections between students and faculty, the other learning partners and co-educators on campus, and students and their peers. And so this is going to be a challenge that students are going to have to grapple with as we go through the next few weeks. Another thing to think about is, they're going to be missing those connections. That's one of the things that we hear so often from students, whether they are recent graduates or graduates from 40 years ago. They remember those relationships that they have with their faculty, the mentoring that they receive, just the care and support that faculty provide to them. So they're going to be missing that. And then finally, this is one that I'm thinking about as I'm thinking about my course. In the School of Education in particular, we do lots of collaborative work because that's the environment that most professional educators work in. They don't work in isolation, they work in teams. So we do a lot of collaborative learning, and sometimes students grouse about that, about differential, sharing of the load. Some students tend to take more responsibility than others. There's challenging and assessing that kind of work. And so they tend to grumble about it. I don't know if you've had a similar experience, but I suspect in this context where they're feeling isolated, they actually may be missing some of those opportunities to work with their classmates. So we'll be sharing some opportunities primarily through the G Suite, the Google Suite of applications, where we can continue some of those collaborative experiences that students can have with one another. But that's one of those things that the students may find that they miss more than they realized. So here's the content. Here's where we're going to structure this webinar session. So we're going to think about three different aspects of engagement. One is students engaging with the instructor, students engaging with the content that they're learning and grappling with as they go, and students engaged with each other in the process of their learning. So we'll take those in turn, and we'll again provide some ideas to consider, some strategies that may be helpful to you, and point you to some resources for further exploration. So first is the student-instructor engagement. And again, we've talked a little bit about this. The students really value that personal connection, that mentoring. It's amazing when I walk through classroom buildings on campus and I see some of the lines out the door of students waiting for office hours to meet with their professor. And oftentimes it's not because they want to discuss a grade or because they're worried about an assignment. Sometimes it's just they want that extra support and guidance. Maybe they're thinking about what's next for them, et cetera. So that's really important. And I think faculty are very, very attentive to students and their needs. In a remote format, though, it's a little trickier because we don't have that one-to-one personal connection. We don't have that ability to bump into each other in the hallway. So one of the things I think that's really helpful for us to think about as we navigate this time is being very proactive in the way we reach out to students and know that we're there to support them. And I think in particular to communicate clearly to them that we understand as faculty the challenges that they have as learners in this remote context, that we know that students are under very different pressures. They are encountering different challenges, whether it's access to technology, finding a quiet space to learn. Some students are going to have great family support at home, others are not. Many families are going to be going through really difficult financial strains. So it's really, I think, helpful and important in terms of building that relationship in this remote context to be very clear that we recognize that and we know that's a challenge for them. So definitely some things to think about. So if we think about the idea of the student-instructor engagement in terms of communication, one of the things I think that will be helpful, especially in these this initial week or the initial few weeks, is helping to communicate to students realistic and flexible expectations, to communicate clearly that the class will be perhaps in a very different format, different modality. The expectations might be different in terms of the kind of work we do, the kind of interaction we'll have as a class, and just to be very as forward facing with that, even as it's in development, just letting them know that things are going to be a little bit different, and that we're going to try as faculty to be as clear with our expectations, but also as flexible as we can, whether it's with deadlines or the mode of participation or the mode of response to assignments, that if we can communicate that we are going to try to help them and work within the constraints that they're facing, it'll go a long way towards students being successful and again, feeling connected and supported. One way to do that is to push out a quick survey to gather information about their particular issues. This is something we're literally working on today. We're working with student affairs and several faculty that have already pushed out surveys to their students, or programs that have pushed out surveys to their students have shared those with us. So we're trying to create a really kind of a best of survey that asks different kind of questions, and we'll share it with you all in a way that is editable so that you can customize that survey, that you can really get a sense of what your needs are. We're also thinking about the need, whether there's a need, and if so, how that might play out to do more of a central way of pushing out that survey. But it's really helpful, even in that first class session, whether it's synchronous together online in a Zoom meeting or something like that, or asynchronous through a Blackboard discussion board. It's really helpful to try to get a sense for what students may be challenged with or have questions about. And then this is something we've been increasingly, as we've thought more and more and communicated more and more with faculty as they're thinking about the shift in modality, is thinking about foregrounding some possible lower tech learning activities and solutions that they don't require high-speed internet access, particularly continuous high-speed internet connected connections. So things like learning activities where we push readings out to students, or if they have books with them, or we can work with the libraries to curate materials that they can read, and then do responses, written responses, discussion board posts, things like that that are less resource intensive than live video chats. There's certainly a place for that, but it's really helpful to start to think about, like, what are the optimal or ideal kinds of learning conditions that we can create. And maybe that's a live discussion via Zoom, but what are also those lower bar opportunities and strategies we can use that will still help students move forward in their learning. So we're working on some documentation now. We're going to be building out the website that we'll reference a little bit later with more low-tech solutions as well. But definitely that's I think something that we want to try to foreground and have people thinking about. So then the next thing, just hit on quickly with in terms of the student instructor engagement, is something I've been hitting on, is just this idea of empathy. The more that we can communicate to students that we understand what their challenges are and what they're going through, the better that we're going to be able to reach them. And it just communicates to them that we care about them as individuals. And again, the idea of being willing to renegotiate, whether that's in terms of instructional delivery modality, or whether that's a due date for an assignment, the format of an assignment, I think that's something that's really going to serve us all well if we're open-minded and can be flexible. As there are things in the document we're preparing today to kind of help consider some of the high-tech versus low-tech solutions. One of the things that we want to think about is, like, what are the non-negotiable learning goals that we have for the the next few weeks of the semester, and we need to work around those. But where there are goals that are maybe not absolutely mission critical, if there's opportunities for us to be flexible and negotiate around those, it's definitely helpful.